Greetings, you accursed. Herle here with your ever-loving political panel, Scott Reid, Kory Teneycke, and Jordan Leichnitz. And a great big shout-out to DJ Prime, who went on Apple Podcast ratings and reviews 7 months ago to tell us how much he used to like the show, but now doesn't like the show anymore. Yet 7 months later, went on again to tell us he still listens and still pretty much hates the show. That's precisely the kind of consistency we aim for to keep our listeners glued, Mr. DJ. Thank you for staying with us and crapping on us twice. Much appreciated. All right. Today on the pod, the dance around the confidence vote. Who's on the edge? Who's got the upper hand? Who's already tired of this fucking thing? Then Pablo Rodriguez has left the room and soon the building. The former transport minister and Trudeau's Quebec lieutenant has resigned from cabinet to sit as an independent until he runs for the Quebec Liberal leadership. What kind of blow is that? And do we smell a cabinet shuffle coming? Our cursed clipping is John Ibbitson's piece in the Globe today, and the headline sets it up pretty succinctly: why Doug Ford won his by-elections and Justin Trudeau lost his. Finally, the great Mr. Pinsent will herald our hey yous. Jordan, Kory, Scott, you guys okay? Scott, you recovered yet from Friday night?
Not really. No.
You're in early morning.
I like about 75% of my language skills have returned, but yeah, it was we were out on Friday night and it was a little rough. So you guys remember at the end of the night when there was that flash mob doing calisthenics together?
Yes.
Okay, because I don't. But evidently I wandered over. I am told.
But did you do them?
Yes. I am told that I just slipped in with them and started doing stretches and then fell over like the drunken hunk of pork I am and knocked some athletic woman down and like a kind of Abbott and Costello messiness.
I would say, David, Kory, you had one job, which was to record this.
Oh, no.
No.
You can't record Reid the whole night. You run out of memory, but yeah. Everything is worth capturing.
But we found some fans in the merch lineup, though, too, actually, which was kind of fun.
Exactly.
It was great.
War on drugs fans like the curse of politics. Very, very good to know.
All checks out.
Yeah,
cool.
It does.
Good
it was great fun. Thank you for that, David. It's awesome.
I shouldn't have been there. I'd fucking been, I had been in Emerge all day trying to get an ear infection fixed, which wasn't. So I couldn't even hear the show. I'm like there. I'm halfway between Brian Wilson and Beethoven. I can barely fucking hear the goddamn thing. And we are, of course, ridiculously. We started drinking at what, 4:30? It's bad.
Yeah, it's about that.
Yeah.
I feel like
we
there's
had
some
intended to hit
like
the first act, but we missed the first act.
meta narrative about Ford's Ontario here, but it's good.
Question.
It was a good show.
No question. I just went from corner store to corner store.
I couldn't get help in the ER. I was there all day, but it's okay because I could start at 4:30 at the corner store. I'll see you there.
Okay. All right. Let's talk some politics here. So the demise of the Liberal-NDP deal has created uncertainty about the House of Commons. Maybe uncertainty about what their government will fall, but definitely uncertainty about who will be embarrassed by having to support the government on any given day. The NDP do not want an election. The Liberals most certainly do not want an election. Those two remain, therefore, the most likely dance partners on any given day, but the BQ don't appear to want an election, but don't have any reason to fear one either. So, Scott, how much pressure are both the NDP and the BQ feeling not to vote with the government on confidence motions?
Not that much right now, I don't think. I feel like this is an interesting sort of fall of cards, it seems to me, because it happens so immediately, which makes sense for Poilievre. You know, you would think that he would introduce a confidence motion right away to just test the House and test the other political players and say, well, you know, Jagmeet Singh, if you're going to stand up and say that these guys are greedy and corrupt and they don't deserve another chance, and I'm going to make you wear it when you decide you're going to support them. I also thought it was sort of smart of both the NDP and the Bloc to get it really fast. And, you know, I got to say that because I've recommended this before here. They just got out there fast to try to take the political drama out of this. Like, don't let air build up. Don't let pressure build up. And I thought in particular, even though it is awkward because I thought he was so kind of cartoonishly extreme in his rhetoric, sing when he ripped up the supply and confidence agreement. I think it's important for him to not vote in favor of it, because I heard some people say, well, if the Bloc are already indicating they're not going to vote, then that gives you a pass. But I don't think it does, because he doesn't know what the next confidence vote will look like. And he, I think, has to establish, I think the first time he votes non-confidence in the government has to fall. Like, I think he's got to be really careful how he plays his cards there. So, and I assume at some point the Bloc's going to come knocking.
Doesn't he have to have a threshold? Doesn't he have to, it's not like, don't we have to know what he's looking for at some point? Or
I think that's right. And that's one thing, even though it's not surprising that Poilievre would drop this thing, it kind of took him off the hook of that. I don't think he had to articulate a threshold. I think as it gets later into the fall, he's going to have to start to talk about what his boundaries are, what his red lines, what his tests are. By the way, there's one other thing that our friend Marika Walsh said on a podcast I was listening to the other day, Marika from the Globe, and I thought it was really, really, really a smart point. And that is, the Bloc and the NDP don't want an election now, but they do want an election against Justin Trudeau. So boy, oh boy, this gets tricky as you get closer to Christmas, because you must harbor, no matter what the Prime Minister says, some sense of anxiety that he could go away for Christmas, ruminate on his life, and come back and announce that he's not running again. And then suddenly you lose the guy that you want to run against. So I think it's going to be super interesting to watch how this kind of vote occurs toward the end of November. And I think, again, that probably has huge implications for what the government does in their financial economic statement. I'd be very leery about bringing it in November and then having a confidence vote.
Why do you think the Bloc want to run against Trudeau? Why wouldn't they rather run against whatever Anglo the Liberals replace him with?
I just think that the guy's numbers are what they are. And if they can win in LaSalle-et-Marde, I mean, if you're them and you can win in LaSalle-et-Marde, are you not thinking to yourself, this guy is a dartboard, and we want to keep him right where he is?
Yeah, but he's still likely to be better than an Anglo, like I said. But in any event, so Quebec, sticking with Quebec, and Kory, maybe you can help us with this. There's so much provincial politics and federal politics right now. And one of the examples of that is that the Premier of Quebec is now going after Blanchet for keeping Trudeau in office. And he's decided that he's going to wedge against the Parti Québécois by saying that their Ottawa cousins are supporting Trudeau and keeping Trudeau in office. That's a different angle that maybe is going to put some pressure on Blanchet, perhaps.
It could, and I think it's a smart play to be making. I think to Scott's point, Trudeau is very unpopular everywhere, including Quebec, and I guess it's a bit of a roll of the dice as to who ends up winning a Liberal leadership if he were to step down. There's probably some versions of that are more problematic for the BQ. In all likelihood, if it's a Carney or someone, gosh, I would think that they would want that more, but. All of that to say, the Quebec provincial politics is going to be pretty interesting. It looks like the PQ is going to win if the election's tomorrow, but it's not a blowout. So let's see. And certainly, I guess we're going to be talking about this shortly, but. Rodriguez going there is going to shake the table a bit more as well. And I'll defer to people who are closer to Quebec politics as to what kind of difference that'll make. But I got to think it's only good for the Liberal Party of Quebec. I don't know. In terms of confidence motions and all of that, David, I wonder if the other test for the NDP is going to be around pharmacare. They're so connected to this narrative of the dental and the pharmacare and all of that. And until that's actually through the Senate and becomes, has the force of law, I think it's pretty contradictory for them to go to the polls. And I think they've got a fairly good narrative track to saying they're going to support the government until that's done.
That was smart of Duclos, I thought, to play that card. Like, that showed a little... I thought that was putting a little sand in the.
What did you think about that? What did you think about that, Jordan? Duclos sort of saying, "Listen, it's up to the NDP whether dental happens or not."
Yeah, I mean, I think I rolled my eyes so far that they saw the back of my head, but that's probably not surprising. I think in general, the attitude from certain Liberals that the NDP should sort of stop trying and lay down and die so that they can have some chance of survival is maybe not the best look for them. But I do think
I'll just say, because I still have scars from this, Jordan,
yes.
that when the roles are reversed, the NDP think the same fucking thing.
Well, perhaps we'll find out,
sure.
David. Perhaps we'll find out.
Sure.
I mean, look, I think Kory's right. Yeah, they're absolutely, and you can see them already starting to set up the passage of dental as an important litmus test this fall. And I don't think it makes any sense for the party to push the country to the polls before that's done. It is close, right? Like if that's attainable, that's something that they can actually get. And I think that meets the nod test for people. I was interested this week. I thought, for the Conservatives to go early, that made a lot of sense in terms of the confidence motion. But for the Liberals to give a series of opportunities to the Conservatives very early on in the parliamentary calendar, I thought was actually uncharacteristically clever in terms of their House strategy, because basically now every time they have their opposition day, there's going to be an expectation that the Conservatives bring forward some form of a confidence motion. And each and every time they do it, the drama will be diminished. The stakes will be diminished because it's all being loaded at the front of the session when everyone sort of agrees that there's not really a high probability of an election. So, I mean, they're going to continue to hit that button, of course, because that's core to their narrative. It's also very good for them on fundraising. But I actually thought it was a pretty good way for the Liberals to bleed a little bit of the drama out of it. And I also feel like, I don't know if you guys had the same observation this week, but I feel like Blanchet is just like having the most fun out of anybody right now in Ottawa. Like so much fun.
He practically has feathers sticking out of his mouth. He's just like, ha ha, I caught it. I'm eating it. I'm having a ball.
Very true. Very true. Yeah, I do. I guess I also wonder, second what you said, Jordan, about, putting opposition motions forward fast. But I also wonder if there, isn't a way that the other opposition parties could craft a confidence motion that the Conservatives couldn't accept. Like, for instance, some sort of new carbon pricing scheme to replace the carbon tax or something like that. That would also be an interesting question in my mind. And because I'm thinking back to the days of Harper minority governments. And there becomes a sort of interesting three-dimensional game of confidence that you get with opposition parties, where the terms that you set for going to the polls become unpalatable even to a leading opposition party, depending on how it's framed. All of that said, if I were the Conservatives, I'd take an election no matter what, no matter how you could get it. But I do think there's some room to maneuver that'll be interesting to see. The other thing I'll be interested to see is if they prorogue, because you could also see them passing some stuff the NDP likes and then hitting pause and buying them some space that way. So, I guess that there are a number of different plays that they could make.
When would you prorogue, Kory? After the fall economic statement?
Yeah, to the Feds, and then pass a couple of the things that the NDP want, and then
out of Dodge,
and then hit pause until February, and that buys you some space, but maybe gives you
unless if you're Trudeau. Unless if you're Trudeau and you do decide at some point you want to go, in which case then you want to keep prorogue in your pocket for that calendar, right? So you might want to prorogue.
Well, that could line up with a December departure.
Exactly.
Though.
Yeah.
Well, it could, but to your earlier point, Scott, maybe the opposition doesn't want to give you the time to make that change, and so there's elements of surprise. I think I'd be prepared for anything. I think. So for all the parties, I assume we're going to start seeing pre-writ advertising commitments from folks, because we could be in a campaign very early in the new year. If not, I think it's still more remote that it happens this fall, but it's not a 0% chance. It's certainly possibilities for it to happen.
I would also say around the opposition days, just one other thing to watch for is that, you're going to have also opportunities, and I think you'll see this particularly from the NDP. They may not bring forward confidence motions, but they're going to bring forward the biggest wedge they can find for the Liberal caucus, just to make life absolutely miserable for them. And that punishment will go on as long as they can drag that out.
Why are you trying to
punishment,
wedge the Conservatives, though, too, in your opposition motions? Like, I actually see almost more benefits for them in doing that. But,
You've heard us talking about it on Cursive Politics. I've taken a deeper dive with my guests on the Hurly-Burly. It dominates the news cycle, and it's being used as a powerful political cudgel by parties across the country. The issue is housing in Canada. In the broadest sense, it's accessibility and affordability. And so I'm taking it up here for the next month or so on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS. Not to add more words to the millions already circulating, but because TELUS is doing something about it. They're taking action. It's a new initiative called TELUS Living, the creation of an all-new, mixed-use and purpose-built rental residential portfolio designed to address urgent housing needs, community by community, all over British Columbia. TELUS's goal here is to support local, provincial, and federal governments dealing with the housing crisis by building sustainable living spaces to high-quality standards and with seamless integration of technology. How does TELUS do this, you might ask? Where do they get the property? Let me tell you a short upcycling story. We've talked here a lot about TELUS migrating from copper wiring to fiber optic cable, which is faster, more durable, and superior in every way. Well, fiber also takes up far less physical space than copper. So TELUS is reimagining and repurposing their own, now freed up real estate. Older copper hubs are being upcycled and redeveloped into purpose-built residences the working middle class can afford. Teachers, emergency personnel, and other essential workers, students and young professionals, with a mix of unit sizes and amenities designed to fit the unique needs of each community. Damn clever, if you ask me. And they'll have all the connectivity and smart living technology you'd expect from TELUS. Next week, I'll tell you about 3 projects already underway in BC. Or find out more right now at telusliving.com. So, the Liberals say nobody wants an election. The Conservatives say everybody wants an election. I don't presume actually that most people care when the election is at this point, one way or another. But who loses from these? It's perhaps the wrong way to put it. How do these continuing confidence votes shape public perceptions? Like, people probably aren't aware of the particular legislation or necessarily have a strong point of view about what's being voted on at any given point in time. But nonetheless, does it leave an impression, like I thought, Kory, to go back to your Harper example, that the Liberals just over time looked weak for ultimately always buckling under and supporting the government. When you're thinking about how to vote on these things, what is the overall impression that you're leaving?
Well, I think it's very different for the different parties. Like, for when you look at who wants an election, who doesn't, another way of looking at it is the conservative voter universe all want an election. The non-conservative voter universe all don't want an election because, NDP and BQ and Liberal supporters and Green supporters don't want to have Poilievre as prime minister. And so they would prefer to have a weak Liberal government over an election in which the Conservatives are most certainly going to win. And anyone who's in the conservative voter universe, they want to have a campaign tomorrow. And that'll continue to be the case. And when you look at who wants an election and who doesn't, like, that's sort of what the dividing line is. And this is why, I always say nobody ever wants an election when you ask them, right? Like, it divides it down on the line of who do you think is going to win. And the people who don't want that party in don't want to have it happen. So I think for the Conservatives, there's no downside in doing a conference motion every week if they were able to. Of course, they can't. They won't have that many opposition days, but there's no downside for them pushing for a vote. It's more complicated for the NDP and the Bloc. The NDP are having to walk this tightrope of opposing the government and trying to tap into some of the time for change sentiment that's out there while keeping it afloat and saying, well, but we're getting stuff that you like. But I even in that scenario, I think NDP voters, for the reasons that I just mentioned, are more comfortable having the government stay in power longer. So, I'm not sure there's a downside for anyone. I don't think, the comms path for Singh is comfortable as it is for the Conservatives because of the contradiction that's inherent in that message. But I don't think ultimately it's hurting NDP keeping the Liberals afloat on the basis of pharmacare and dental care, et cetera.
Hey, Scott, coming back to Duclos' dare on dental care. I mean, one of the things I'm curious about when I watch all this is that when the Liberals talk about what would be lost if Poilievre won, or the important work that they've done, they overwhelmingly cite the things that were done as a result of the Accord. Right? They talk about dental, they talk about pharma, as if those are the lead reasons to re-elect the Liberals, not reasons to vote NDP, and not the other things that they've done that were not part of the... They don't talk about EV plants very much. They talk about dental care. And so is that part of their strategy of managing the House, or is that actually what they think is relevant for them?
I think both. I thought that it was a clever tactic on Duclos' part to raise that issue and to create that critical path. I think in a weird way, by the way, it takes some pressure off the NDP. It does give the NDP a threshold. It allows them to spend the fall saying, well, look, we've got a purpose in preserving this parliament is to get that completed. But I still thought it was clever of Duclos to bring it up. But since the week before Parliament resumed, when you listen to the House Leader, when you listen to the Prime Minister, when you listen to the Finance Minister, they recite this list of things. So I think they think those are their winning wickets. I think the problem. I'll take your who wins, who loses. How is all this monkeying around? If it has any effect, what does it mean? I'll focus on the Conservatives and Liberals for 1 second. So I'll start with the Liberals because it flows out of your question. I think that the government has a present tense political problem. And I think as long as you're talking about, will you survive the next confidence vote? And what are you doing? And dental care and pharmacare. And then you're rounding off thoughts. It all is about, you're frozen in time. This is all about the present tense. They're never getting any oxygen into talking about, you know what, here's what we have in mind. Here's where we want to go. Here's the next job. There's no future in their message. There's no, other than saying, oh, well, because there'll be a national food program, so there'll be future. But they don't have we have a burning agenda that we are itching to implement, and therefore we must be reelected, and it aligns with the things you are. It's all about the present tense, and I just don't think that actually works. And I think the machinations of the House tend to keep you in that present tense political problem. For the Conservatives, I know a lot of Liberals who think that Poilievre is going to expose himself as just unpalatably partisan, constantly trying to force an election. I hear this thing about what people know an election. Challenge is, as Kory points out, nobody wants an election, but many people want change, right? So I like change. I just like to skip the part where people knock on my door and go, hi, I'm from party X. You're like, get the fuck away from me, okay? So I don't think it's a problem in the way that people do. Some people say, some Liberals in particular say, but I think there's an opportunity here for Poilievre to say more than he does. And it isn't just to be limited as it's time to kill these guys, axe attacks, builds a boat, builds a house, sails a boat, brings it back to, it's all that same. I think there's an opportunity for him to say, the reason we want an election is that we are absolutely dying to take this country in a different direction, to do this and this and this. We want to make some changes. We got to do, and so we can't get there until we have an election. But it just sounds like we want an election because then we'll flush these fuckers, and that will be good for me. And I think there's an opportunity for him to round out his message.
I don't know. There's probably not many things they're going to propose that are going to be more popular than 45%, which is where they're currently at.
Well, but he's going to have to face these questions at some point. So I start itching into it as opposed to just, we're going to axe attacks, we're going to cat the hat, we're going to build the boat, we're going to, whatever the Christ that thing is. I hate that rhyming couplet thing that he does.
So physicists sometimes amuse themselves by solving a puzzle in which Superman has to stop a freight train traveling at 120 kilometers an hour. The idea is to calculate how much force he must exert to stop it within 150 meters. The answer, to a non-physicist, is incomprehensible. It involves long equations in numbers and letters. A moving train is a behemoth of staggering power, mass, and momentum. It weighs tens of thousands of tons. Normally, using air brakes instead of Superman, a train can take up to 2 kilometers to stop. And because of its size, a train always looks like it's moving slower than it is. So, train tracks are best avoided. And yet, each year, more than 100 Canadians are seriously hurt or killed on train tracks. Some thought the tracks were a nice place to take photos. Others thought they were a good location for an evening walk or bike ride. But it's illegal and extremely dangerous and can cost you your life. This week is Rail Safety Week. Our sponsor, CN, takes nothing more seriously than safety. Its police force patrols tracks, and it invests a great deal of money and effort on signage and education. But it needs everyone to stay a safe distance from trains and tracks. To be clear, it's not just walking on the tracks that's unsafe. Boxcars are often wider than locomotives, so walking alongside tracks can get you killed too. And venturing onto a train trestle or into a train tunnel is just nuts. Even a still train can start moving at any moment. If you are on or near one when that happens, you can lose a limb or your life. Believe me when I say how seriously CN takes safety. But it cannot change the laws of physics. Stay away from trains and their tracks, folks. They are nearly the most powerful things on Earth. Jordan, what do you think about Are the NDP and the Liberals going to spend the whole campaign in a fight about who's responsible for dental care?
Well,
which is frankly not the top issue in the country.
Yeah, it's not the top issue in the country. I think that there will for sure be jockeying for who gets to claim the mantle of that. I think there's a tension because it's evident in many ways that the confidence and supply agreement supplied a governing agenda for the Liberals. It really did. And you can see that in the Liberals' own communications around it. But the NDP's ability to sell the idea that they were responsible for that is always a challenge, right? The party just generally has a smaller megaphone, money-wise, credibility-wise in people's eyes around those types of things. So that's going to be a hard fight. And I think that if they're smart, they won't dwell there too long. It's a useful proof point in terms of what does the NDP do when they get power? They deliver these sorts of things. But I think a little bit to what Scott was talking about, you want to take the opportunity to be forward-looking. You want to take the opportunity that Liberals are not going to have over the next, say, 6 to 9 months and cast forward in terms of what voters are thinking about next and what's in the future for them, not just something that happened over the course of the last parliament. And so I think if they're smart, that's where they'll try to spend their energy. But to your earlier question about who benefits from these confidence votes and, a long fall with a number of confidence votes, I do tend to think that overall this benefits the Conservatives, even if there is sort of diminishing returns for them each time they pull that plug. Because most Canadians, I think generally they want their governments to work. They want things to happen. And when you get into a persistent period where it's very visible that there's deep dysfunction in Parliament, there's deep dysfunction and negativity in the media around political coverage, even greater than we've seen over the last couple of years. And I think that for all of the hand-wringing about the tone of politics in Canada right now, we also have to remember that the confidence and supply agreement actually passed a large positive bit of coverage over that. Like, that changed the tone in a lot of ways. That allowed for a lot more sense that things were functioning. Well, that's all gone now. And so when you have a lot of persistent coverage about things not working, I think that is fundamentally suppressive for a lot of progressive voters. It's very demotivating. And I think in particular, likely for Liberal voters, people just don't really want to spend their time engaging with that. And so I do think that favors an energized Conservative base in a way that isn't overall great predominantly for for Liberal voters.
Great.
Well, one other thing that on timing that I'm certainly looking at and questioning, like we're seeing unemployment tick up a little bit. Like there are signs that the economy is softening. I think many people thought there would be more in the way of rate cuts. I wonder if we're not going to be coming into the spring into more turbulent economic waters, which might make things even better for the Conservatives than they are today, and even more challenging for the government. And so, if I were Freeland and the federal government, I'd be looking at that and wondering, what's on the horizon, and whether or not things aren't actually going to get worse in the spring than they are today.
No, time has to be on their side.
Well, not necessarily.
Corey, the U.S.
Not
election.
necessarily.
The U.S. election.
Well, that's the other thing they're going to be looking at. But whether Harris or Trump win, I think that's, as we've talked about before, a false hope that it's going to have much bearing on what happens in Canada. But if you think things are bad now, can you imagine if we see the economy slip into recession in the new year?
That's when you see the Mulroney Pierre Trudeau type numbers.
Yeah. Like that's how it gets worse. And I wouldn't say that's a completely improbable scenario. I think pressure on things like immigration is going to go up. I think questions around affordability are only going to get worse. If you think life's unaffordable today, try it if you don't have a job.
I think something that's really interesting about what Kory is saying, and particularly the pressure on immigration, is that we are seeing the government make some fairly substantial policy moves on immigration, yet without altering any of their top-line communication around it, which I think is a really
nothing to see here.
Fascinating move. So they're making the changes that they're hoping will relieve the pain point on the immigration file, but not communicating them in any sort of direct way, which I think I'm not sure that's going to get them where they think they need to go.
EB's line of attack strikes me as pretty effective in terms of targeting the federal government on increasing the number of people in the province quite dramatically, at the same time not providing the underlying supports to build the schools and the hospitals and the infrastructure necessary to support those people. So, like I find it interesting that it's actually an NDP premier that is leaning the most overtly into pressures around immigration. Not a conservative, and not and coming from that province. I find it interesting.
I would say Lego bushwhacked that.
Well, yeah.
Smith is on that wicket too, obviously.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But I kind of discount Quebec in this conversation, Jordan, because there's a cultural component around protection of French language and stuff that's just so long-standing. But yes, you're absolutely right. Lego first, but I do find EB's use of that as a wedge pretty fascinating. If we look 6 months ago, basically EB was campaigning with Trudeau on a whole range of issues, and now he's campaigning against Trudeau on many of the same issues. We went from the baloney factory line around carbon tax to rejecting carbon tax as a policy instrument.
Well, I saw EB leading the pitchfork mob at the Council of Federation, so I'm not so sure about that. But yeah.
Well, I do think it's interesting, and maybe we'll return to this at some point. I think, Jordan, the thing I think is most interesting about your saying is that the Liberals do not want to communicate change in any way. Mm-hmm. Even when they are changing, not just immigration, when they are changing, they want it to appear as if it's been part of a master plan right from 2015, from the day they were elected. It's all unfolding the way it should. It's all part of it. They're not prepared to acknowledge the public sentiment that they have failed in some areas and that they need to change course. They're just not. And so they are determined to fly straight into the face of the change sentiment.
Well, it's always been one of the Achilles heels of this government that the prime minister is willing to apologize for literally anything and everything that happened, at some point in history. Like they're willing to throw everyone from Sir John A. to Wilfrid Laurier under the bus in an avalanche of apologies, but they will not admit that, even taking a vacation on somebody's private island is a mistake, let alone a reversal on a policy issue, whether it's housing, or immigration, which I think are probably the two biggest ones that you could flag from the last 6 months.
Yeah.
But I'm more curious actually about what you guys think about that, because it seems to me that there is this blank space, right? Like there is this blank space between a clearly articulated, at minimum internally, acknowledgement that they need to shift course on some policy priorities, and then a clear public demand for change, and like nothing in the middle connecting those two things.
No.
I don't think it's hard to understand. I mean, everyone here is sort of rushing to say it's a character issue. It reflects the stubbornness of the prime minister and the prime minister's office, or unwillingness to concede any failing and therefore any need for correction. And that's almost certainly a part of it, a dimension of it. Any of us who've been in a prime minister's office after a few years start to, almost involuntarily acquire some of those habits. But I also think it isn't just character; it's question. It's all question marks for them. How do you make a strategy? The way you make a strategy is you go, where do I want to be? What's the endpoint I'm seeking? And you work backwards. They don't have any idea how to figure out their endpoint. They don't know if the prime minister is actually going to go in the end, and therefore they have to figure out how to accommodate that. They don't know if he's staying, and if so, how are they going to signal change, and what would that change be? So I go back to it, they're kind of stuck in this present tense whirlpool where they're just swimming around.
But they have to be operating on the assumption that he's staying because he wants to stay. So they need to be trying to give him options to stay. If you work for him, you're trying to give him options to stay until he tells you different. That's your job. And so my question is, people want a pound of flesh from this government. You're not going to give it to them in terms of Trudeau's resignation. You're not going to give it to them in terms of a significant policy virage. They're going to take it on election day. They're going to take their pound of flesh on election day. You either give it to them before, or they're going to take it on election day. All right. Yeah. Let's go to John Ibbotson.
They don't. Obviously, they are unwilling or unable to accept that thesis.
Did you know that physical inactivity in Canada is costing the country billions? It's true. Each year, physical inactivity and the resulting medical conditions cost us $3.9 billion in annual healthcare expenditures. In fact, only 49% of Canadian adults and 39% of our youth are meeting recommended physical activity guidelines, which raises a critical question. What is preventing Canadians from being active? There are barriers to getting active: low activity jobs, a lack of safe and accessible recreational spaces, and even cost. Simply put, the conveniences of our modern lifestyles have contributed to physical activity being largely removed from our daily lives, and it's transforming us from an active nation to an increasingly sedentary one. We need to reverse this trend, and fast, because the benefits of an active Canada far outweigh the long-term consequences of inaction. It's time for our leaders of all stripes to step up and inspire a healthier future. It's time to remove barriers and create more opportunities to get Canadians moving. It's time to change the pace. Learn more at changethepace.ca. All right. John Ibbotson, Globe and Mail. The commentariat is obsessed with the federal Liberal loss last week in the once safe Montreal riding of LaSalle-Mart-Verdun. Few, in contrast, took note of last week's by-election in the Ontario provincial riding of Bay of Quinte, won by Doug Ford's provincial Conservatives.
Quinte, not Quinte. Quinte.
Quinte. Like
I have to listen to you guys talk about Saskatchewan non-fucking stop. Let's get Quinte right.
Right. Why did Mr. Ford's PCs win their by-election while Justin Trudeau's Liberals lost their... I'm actually starting to lisp, Scott. As I get older, my lips don't work as well, and sometimes it's very depressing.
Jesus, you're hard of hearing. You're lisping. This is a downbound train.
Really designed for podcasting. Really designed for podcasting. All right. Why did Mr. Ford's PCs win their by-election while Justin Trudeau's Liberals lost theirs? One reason might be that the Premier obsesses over the needs of suburban, middle-class, car-commuting voters, while Mr. Trudeau has other priorities. Mr. Ford caters to the wishes of his suburban, middle-class, car-commuting voting base, ignoring the experts. It has earned him 2 majority governments, and as Thursday's by-election revealed, he remains popular. Justin Trudeau has won the support of suburban Ontario voters in past elections, but his party now trails the Conservatives by a whopping 19 points in the province. it appears Suburban Ontario is set to deliver Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre a majority government. The Liberals cite their new childcare, dental care, and pharmacare programs. But for many suburban middle-class car commuting voters, these aren't top priorities. Their employer offers dental and prescription plans. They aren't currently in need of subsidized daycare. They want stronger incomes, cheaper mortgages, and a faster commute. All right, Jordan. Does Ibbotson have this correct? Is this why the two by-elections go different ways?
I mean, I think he overstates the case, I would say. Like, to me, here you have a riding that has been conservative for 13 years. I think in a lot of ways it was the PCs to lose. And you also have a context where the federal Conservatives are surging beyond all reason, really, where the provincial Liberals are burdened by a unbelievably unpopular brand at the moment. So, I mean, I think that to me, those factors really would lead this outcome. I'm not sure. I'm not persuaded necessarily that Ford is going to win it on beer and convenience stores and opposing bike lanes. Like, there are other concerns for these suburban voters, even if you agree with the thesis that sort of big program spending is not necessarily something that they're looking for top of mind. Like, they are looking for things in their lives to just work. And I think that there are still big vulnerabilities for Ford there. There are vulnerabilities on the housing file, where despite the Ford government's apparent desire to hand out MZOs to everyone and their mom, they're still not getting the housing built. They're still not taking actions like as of right fourplexes, things that they could be doing to accelerate housing supply. So there's a gap there that could be certainly be exploited. And then healthcare, of course, is the other big one. And I think that for those voters, they do care that they can't find a family doctor. They do care, and you can look at, Scott will know this, like Bay of Quinte, like Belleville General Hospital's got some of the worst wait times in the province. Like, there are opportunities to move these races onto issues that are weaker for the PCs. But right now, some of the broader currents are really favoring them. And I think that that's really what the story is here.
Right, but they do. I mean, they do more than the federal Liberals seem to understand the cost of living pressure. Maybe they're not dealing with it the way that you would prefer that they deal with it. But I just don't see that most.
They're choosing facets of it that resonate well with their leaders' ability to connect to those issues, right? Like they are choosing areas to work in where Ford has personal credibility and can carry off that message. And so that's the connect that is really missing out of the federal Liberals when they talk about affordability issues, is that there's no connection between the people on their front bench and the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance when they speak about issues of affordability. There's no sense that that's actually resonating with some of the policy prescriptions or with lived experience or anything like that. So they have, like, some of that is also just a leadership and a political personality gap that they haven't to close.
Yeah. Scott, Kory talked about the economy getting weaker and unemployment rising and stuff. The last two governments that went deep into their term, trying to find a way to win after 10 years, and were in recessions were the Mulroney government and the Pierre Trudeau government. And in their last budgets, they both opened the taps up. Trudeau had what he called Marc Lalonde had what he called a special recovery program. It was $5 billion of spending in 1983. That was real money, real money in Canada. And in 1992, Don Masikowski and Brian Mulroney cut taxes significantly for people. In both cases, they blew up the deficit. In both cases, it was probably irresponsible economic policy. But that's what they felt they needed to do at the time. Do you have any sense the Liberals might take some similar approach in the Fez or the budget?
Oh, of course they will, particularly if Trudeau hangs on. That will occur. And I mean, one obvious test, and circles back to our initial discussion just around the House and campaigning and managing the various parties. The Bloc wants that OAS play, and that's big cabbage. That's huge. And I don't even think the Liberals are disinclined to do it, other than maybe the finance minister representing the traditional constituency of the finance department around the cabinet table saying, hang on. But yeah, I think that is likely. I think just going back to Ibbitson's column, I mean, look, John's not wrong, but it's not new. It's not new for him. He's been writing this column about the 905 and suburban vote since literally the mid 90s when he was a bureau chief at Queen's Park, and he's and we've all discussed this. I think one of the interesting things that's tonally different about the federal Liberals and the provincial Conservatives at Queen's Park is not just the emphasis on the economy, but the emphasis that you get out of the government, which is in some ways a byproduct of A, their own philosophy and view of the world, and B, the supply and confidence agreement with which they've been hitched for the past handful of years. It's always a programmatic remedy. So you go back to the recitation, the list that you're talking about. The remedy is always a new set of programs. It's always going to be a national food program. It's going to be a national dental care program. And then they make the argument
for some people. Me? I don't know. I can't tell you.
And then insistently, they make the argument that this is actually an economic thesis, that this is an economic benefit because you're saving costs and all that sort of stuff. But it's 2-3 steps of logic, and it removes a lot of people from the equation because a lot of people won't get those benefits and they do not qualify for those programs. And so I find that, I really think like at the macro level, it's almost you get a collision of fundamental thesis, which is we're going to bring you a program or a program for some people, except for those who don't need it. And that's the way that we're going to strengthen the economy. And you get other people saying, well, I'm going to recruit, I'm going to recruit some, plant, and we're going to build jobs and all that kind of stuff. And there's lots of holes to be punched in that, but
there's a lot more people who feel they need help than the government feels need help. Trust is one of those interpretive and abstract words. We can't buy it at a store or put it in our pocket, but most of us feel it when it's there and when it's not. Canadians put a large measure of trust in our banks. It's where we keep our hard-earned money, save for that first home, or set aside for our kids' education. Over 99% of adult Canadians have an account with a financial institution. Almost everyone you know. And with that kind of responsibility, banks know they've got to have your back. Banks also serve close to 3 million self-employed folks and small to medium-sized businesses across Canada, helping them grow and thrive. That's a lot of people relying on the same trust and support you count on every day. With over 280,000 Canadians working in banking, this commitment runs deep, right from your local branch to the folks working in the background who keep everything ticking. It's not just about individual success, it's about powering our country. Whether you're paying your bills online from the comfort of your couch, planning that dream vacation, or just managing day-to-day expenses, your bank has to be there, working behind the scenes to make sure everything runs smoothly and securely. So the next time you make a financial decision, big or small, know that Canada's banks appreciate your trust and are dedicated to return it. For all the essential information about Canada's banks, visit cba.ca. Kory, is there any chance that you have any insight into why Premier Ford wins by-elections and Justin Trudeau does not?
Better campaign management clearly is the only difference.
And deep modesty.
Sartorial factor.
Look, I think John makes a number of points in the piece that I think are valid. Comparing provincial and federal, though, is always a little tricky because the issue sets are so different. Like the number of levers that provinces have on affordability are pretty limited. Budgets are stretched to the breaking point, trying to fund healthcare and education and the rest. And taxation powers mostly rest with the federal government. So, and things like the Bank of Canada and sort of the macroeconomic management, people look to Ottawa on that more than they do to the provinces. And so, I think the affordability crisis, higher interest rates, all of that. I think eyes are turned more to Ottawa naturally. And I think the carbon tax is thanks in large part to Poilievre's efforts at branding it, is disproportionately seen as a cause of affordability problems that are within the scope of the government to control. And so I think that explains a lot of the difference. That said, I think the Ford government's been pretty deliberate in terms of focusing on a handful of areas that voters want them focused on. One of the biggest issues in Ontario is commute times. Like, three of us live in the GTA. It is impossible to get from A to B in the city. And it's some of the worst commute times in the entire world. And so talking about highways, talking about, the impact that bike lanes on major thoroughfares, bike lanes are great. I use them myself, but does it have to be on Bloor Street? Does it have to be on Yonge Street? Can it be on a side street? There are a lot of people who ask these questions because they're trying to get from A to B in a reasonable amount of time. And they feel like nobody is making it easier. They feel like they're making it worse. When you're looking at the political parties. So I think, if you're to look at things that helped us in the last provincial election win, the 413, a very, very big issue. And, the two opposition parties were competing with each other in their opposition to it, despite the fact that about 75% of people in the 905 belt want that highway. Pretty hard to win if you've got the government with 75% of the electorate on a key issue, and then
but the Libs and the NDP were fighting over downtown Toronto, right?
Yeah, but even in downtown Toronto, it's a 50-50 issue, and you're giving Ford 50% of the electorate there, and you've got three parties dividing up the other 50. So any way you look at it, it's a fantastic wedge issue, and why the Liberals choose to fight for the minority of people on some of these issues is a mystery to me politically, and one of the reasons why they're probably not doing very well. The other thing that I find bizarre is the focusing of the brand around Bonnie Crombie to the extent that they're doing it. The baseline support for the Liberal Party. I'll take issue a bit with what Jordan said. The Liberals don't have a brand problem; they have a Trudeau problem. The Liberal brand is probably the most resilient political brand, in the Western world, certainly in Canada. But they have a leadership problem, and Trudeau is the problem. The Liberal Party is not the problem, in the view of most voters. In fact, their voter ceiling goes over 50% the second he's not on the ballot. So, I don't know. That's a mystery to me as well.
But it is clear that provincial politics is going to change when Trudeau is gone and defeated, right? Because at the end of these long stretches, I'm not making predictions in any given jurisdiction, but I will say that at the end of these long federal governments, usually their provincial counterparts are in big trouble at the end of those runs, right? And usually there aren't a lot of provincial governments of that stripe. And so it's going to be difficult. I mean, there's elections going on right now, and New Brunswick is the one where the Liberals are viable, but there's no question the brand is going to be hurting them in that election.
Well, I think the obvious remedy is to call together your troops, have a membership vote, change your name depending on what province you are to X United, and rock on. We have a proven path to success.
Yeah.
Solid, yeah.
Well, that would sort of underline my point that the Liberal part of it isn't the issue. But look, I think concern and anxiety around the economy and economic issues and affordability is disproportionately falling on the shoulders of Trudeau. And when he's gone, that blame will be apportioned out to others, including premiers, and that will definitely have an impact, no doubt about it.
All right, so Pablo Rodriguez, longtime friend of the Herle Burley. Pablo Rodriguez is going back to Quebec to run for the provincial Liberal leadership, and God bless him. The country needs a strong provincial Liberal party in Quebec, and I think he'll be good at it. So God bless you, Pablo, on that. But nonetheless, he's left. And Scott, I'm going to start with you on this and you can pick which part of this interests you the most. What are the implications of the loss of Pablo from cabinet and from his position as Quebec lieutenant? Listen to those lips again. And the second thing is, what do you make of the fact they didn't replace him?
Pablo Picasso was never called an asshole, not like you. Whenever his name comes up, I think of Jonathan Richmond. So I'll just quickly echo, just for the sake of filing it in. I am equally enthusiastic about Pablo going to Quebec and grateful that he's willing to try to make that sacrifice. And I do think it's a sacrifice. It's an uphill battle, and good on him. I hope he's a difference maker. When you say they didn't replace him, you mean they subsumed his responsibilities for the NIDA and an existing.
Yeah,
ministry.
they didn't. I mean, transport's a full-time job, and Treasury Board is a full-time job, especially under her, because under her it's a senior economic ministry, right?
I think,
so it doesn't seem sustainable that you would for a year have one person do both of those jobs.
Well, I keep repeating myself. I think it's all sort of indicative of all of and putting Duclos in as the Quebec lieutenant. I mean, I have actually a lot of respect for Duclos. I think he's obviously very, very shrewd and a very capable minister. I don't think of him as a rock'em sock'em political organizer. I don't think of him as the kind of guy that's running a partisan machine. And so to me, it feels like a shoulder shrug. It's like, whatever, like who's next man up? Let's go. And so I
presume they couldn't give it to Champagne and couldn't give it to Joly because they're rivals.
Right.
What would that leave them with?
Well, or would be putative.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it, the reason I feel like I'm repeating myself is I just think a lot of it feels like they're treading water. I mean, it's very curious that they would signal that there could be a bigger cabinet shuffle coming. It's always sort of just push the change down the road, push talk of change, push evidence of change down the road. So I think they were just trying to get past the moment. We're not having a cabinet shuffle here. We're not replacing him here. We're going to deal with that later. Maybe after the U.S. election, maybe before. We don't know. Don't ask us. And it is what it is. I really think we're underestimating the pure political effect of Pablo leaving. I just think that all of his energy, and presumably the energy of whatever machine he can muster and summon, is going to be dedicated to provincial attentions now. And so, I look at what the Liberal Party of Canada must pull out of Quebec politically and how it does that and the unique political culture that includes, and think, man, this is a more significant departure than we have allowed in the national discussion for the past 7 days. So I think it's a measurable diminution of Liberals' prospects in the province of Quebec, and that alarms me because it's like, man, it's got to happen. It's got to happen there if it's happening anywhere.
They didn't want to have a Quebec lieutenant, eh? Like in 2015, they didn't appoint one. They didn't appoint one, and it wasn't until after the 2019 election where they suffered losses in Quebec that the Quebec organization forced them to appoint a Quebec lieutenant.
Well, that's all l'ancien regime. That's all bad bullshit of the past. It's like you and me and Chrétien and everybody. That's all like that was a vestige of another time. And so, again, the clock struck midnight on 2015. And so anyway, it read to me like an indifference to something that the Liberal Party of Canada cannot afford to be indifferent about in the province of Quebec.
Hey, Kory, are they holding out the prospect of a shuffle to continue to keep caucus in line? Because one of the things that amazes me is at this stage of the game, with the end so close, you can still talk to a member of parliament who will shit talk Trudeau for you for half an hour, who will tell you how terrible everything is and how they're destined for defeat. But if they were offered a cabinet job, they'd take it in a heartbeat.
Well,
right?
As we've talked about before, the only problem with any given government, if you ask a backbencher, is that they're not in cabinet, and whatever ailments they perceive to exist in the world would magically be cured, even if it was a junior ministerial appointment in a completely unrelated area to what they're griping about. Everything would come together just perfectly if that were to occur. Yeah,
I mean, if I've been sitting on the sidelines for 10 years and they came to me in the 10th year and they said, we might be doing a shuffle, and you should, wouldn't you be like, fuck you?
Yeah.
If they called me at home right now and said, we're making you the associate minister for bicycles, I'd be like, right on.
Well,
I got to stop and buy a new tie. See you in 4 hours. I'll be there.
First of all, you'd have to convince us that running for public office was anything other than a terrible idea.
Yeah.
For each of us as individuals. And I got to say, I'm not cut out for it. And
say David's in camp. If nominated, I will not serve.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I'm dying to get myself over to the voters.
The Oppo file on me comes in semi-trailers too. So it's not to my liking. Anyway, yeah, but look, the reality is that the prospect of cabinet shuffles does instill a bit of caucus discipline. Like that's always true. So yeah, there's probably some truth in that. I doubt that's the reason why they're doing it. I think they probably would have preferred to keep Pablo if they could have. But it's an added benefit for sure.
But what? Okay, so why do you think they didn't replace him? Why do you think they didn't appoint a full-time transport minister?
Well, in the Quebec lieutenant portion as well, like I think you kind of touched on what I assume part of the reason is who are you going to give it to? And is it somebody who has, potential designs on leadership? Are you going to upset the balance in caucus that way? I don't think being Treasury Board and transportation is sustainable. I do think they are too big of jobs, but also maybe they know something that we don't in terms of some other people who are planning on announcing they're not going to run. I've been told that, when we were talking about the chief stuff a couple of weeks ago, that many of those chiefs that were leaving, they'd known about for, 6-8 months, and they decided not to put the names out. I think it's very plausible that there are some other ministers that are planning not to leave, and they know that, and others don't, and they might want to, bundle those together and do something a little bit bigger with a few more names of folks who aren't running again. That was sort of my operating. That was my operating.
Everywhere you look, it's just treading water, man. It's like synchronized swimmers. They're just treading water.
Well, actually, I think it's worse than that because it's not just treading water. The loss of Pablo or at least, to my outsider perspective, is really far more a story of what Scott is saying, which is a loss of organizational capacity on the ground in Quebec that is going to be, I think, deeply felt. And to have that come...
He's been the senior organizational Liberal for decades.
That's right.
He was the president of the party before he ran. On the heels
of the loss in La Salle-Verdun is brutal. And obviously, the timeline for that is what it is. But this is worse than treading water. This is a huge backslide, I think, for them. To come out of the loss of a safe seat and lose really a pillar of the organizational capacity in Quebec, and to have him need to remain sitting as an independent so as not to trigger another by-election that you might lose is, I think, demoralizing is not the word for it. You're in a different universe at that point, right?
The trade-off was, I don't know if you saw this, Jordan, but he said, I think today or yesterday, that he can't be guaranteed that he would vote confidence in the government.
Yeah, and I mean, so the awkwardness of
Corey, your eyes just went wide. Yeah, no.
Yes, the awkwardness
Pablo
of this arrangement
said that he could not be counted on to vote confidence in the government. Yeah.
Well, I can't believe they made him... He will have
to do what he needs to do.
Yeah. I can't believe that they made him sit as an independent. I just found that sort of shocking. And
did they make him, or did he choose?
Well, I think
he needs to cut them loose. I think he's doing them a favor by hanging around. He's doing them a favor,
absolutely. Right. He's absolutely doing them a favor because there's no guarantee they could hold his seat in a by-election because things are so fucking grim for them. So I actually think, my thoughts coming out of it are really just two, which is, I think it is a massive backslide on the organizational capacity side for them, and all of the public-facing signs that we're seeing would echo that. And number two, I also think it's sort of an interesting commentary about the state of the Liberal caucus or the Quebec caucus within the Liberal Party. There was a time where not having a Quebec lieutenant was unacceptable. We're not having really a robust, forward-looking organizational plan in Quebec was unthinkable. And now when the party is at the moment, I would argue, of maximum peril, certainly in the last decade in Quebec, there's no clear answer to those questions. And I think that previous versions of the Quebec Liberal caucus would have found that patently unacceptable. And clearly there's something different today.
Fin de regime.
Also diminished role of Quebec within Canadian politics writ large. Like, we're not hanging on what's going to happen in Quebec vis-a-vis the Conservative Party, because, since like 2011, the mythology that you need a huge percentage of seats in Quebec in order to form government, especially as a Conservative Party, has been proven to be incorrect. And so, the amount of focus on Quebec, and who's the top, kind of Quebec person in cabinet, that used to be just such a staple of conversation about who has power and control in Ottawa.
But I would argue, if there's one place it would remain, it would be within the federal Liberal Party right now.
Right, but even there, as you say, who the Quebec lieutenant is a sort of esoteric trivia question that is of little relevance to the business of lobbying and power brokering in the city of Ottawa, which is a marked change from what it was for many decades.
I know this won't be much of an insight to people, but I think I'm a fucking dummy. I think I'm a bonehead. I just don't, like, over and over and over again, I look at what's happening and I don't understand it. Like, I'll raise a new topic just out of the blue. Like, the Prime Minister's appearing on Colbert tonight. And I have no beef with it. I'm not one of these guys who goes, what an asshole. He's going to on there and, virtue signal and they'll be anti-Trump and all that stuff, whatever. But I genuinely don't understand what's happening. When I look at the Summers Instagram of the Prime Minister, where he's been going, I know they're trying, it appears to me that they're trying to be more positive, put him in places where he's smiling and shaking hands and being reacted to. And maybe Colbert is part of that, but it also just feels like it's like, I don't know, he's in New York and he wants to. There's a standing invitation and he just wants to go. It's cool. He wants to be on the show. Colbert's funny. It's cool. Like, just wants to. It's not that it fits into any kind of strategic framework. There is no real logic to it. There's only a modest risk that you're going to be asked about Trump and it'll be awkward.
He has a team curating his experience first and foremost.
I don't get what's going on, man.
You're not a dummy, Scott. You're not a dummy. There is absolutely nothing resembling a political strategy right now. Absolutely nothing at any level that resembles. I just can't. I am stunned by how inert the whole thing is.
Maybe it's just really top secret, David, and they're waiting for the.
Well, it should be. A good strategy should be top secret. I would keep it right till after the election if I were them. All right. Time for Gordon Pinsent.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Who's got a Hey You?
I'll go if you want.
Do it.
Mine's for Jennifer Keesmaat. It was like Christmas morning this weekend when I saw that Bonnie Crombie had invited Jennifer Keesmaat to speak to the gathered Ontario Liberals at their conference. I can think of no one better to be advising the Ontario Liberal Party when we're talking about getting around the city and
Kory,
housing.
You're
and
playing
all the rest.
small ball. Come on.
I love it. It's maybe it'll have to be like a triple crown thing. We had the two queens of the carbon tax there, Christy Clark and Bonnie Crombie, and now Jennifer Keesmaat. It's like a trilogy. It's fantastic. I'm looking forward to cutting the ads.
Excellent. Okay.
See, even I didn't take the bait to fight with Kory about bike lanes. Like,
I know.
Very demure, very mindful.
You're very strategic today, Jordan. Yeah. Okay, you got a Hey You?
I do. So my Hey You is going out to Jagmeet Singh today about the confrontation with the heckler protester last week.
I'm right here, bro.
Yeah, right here, bro. No, not the heckler in the house. That's the other heckler. So I think there's going to be a number of people, and they're already out there saying to him, both internally and externally, that it was a mistake. And so my Hey You is going out to him to say, do not listen to them. They're wrong. It was a very good moment for you. It is really important, especially in the wake of the confidence and supply agreement, for you to show strength and purpose. And this was a moment where you did that. It now needs to translate into using that same energy, that same seriousness, into being a fighter for people who feel like they have been left behind and left out by this government. Standing up to bullies is a good energy for you. Keep that. Bring that seriousness to that role and to your offer as a candidate for prime minister. More of that would be great. That's my hey.
I loved it because it was a rare moment of authenticity from him.
Yeah,
I mean,
real.
normally he's such a talking point reader that I can't get any sense of the guy, what is actually going on in there. And I saw it for a moment, and I liked it.
Same. He just wheeled and said, "Hey, what'd you say, motherfucker?" Like, what? Like, I mean, this is like he just felt like a real guy for a minute.
Yeah.
You got to be careful. You got to be careful with that, though. Like, I think I think it probably worked out well for him with the protester. I don't think it worked as well in the House, but those kinds of interactions can go sideways on you really quickly. And you talk about punching down and stuff. Like how you react to protesters. That can work for you or cannot. And
Kretsch has strangled a guy. Kretsch has strangled a guy.
But the guy was a separatist, so it was okay, right? And it was actually.
Well, these guys are convoy nut jobs who harass everyone, so I think it's fine.
Those, I think it probably worked out okay for him for the reasons you said. But like, man, those are dangerous interactions. If you're working on a advanced team, you're probably not trying to curate the next one of those.
Yes, I can say that his advanced team sweats spinal fluid on the daily for many reasons.
No. Was it Daryl Stinson?
Daryl Stinson.
You talking to me, you son of a bitch? Yeah, I love that. That's exactly how my uncles used to talk in the tavern. You son of a bitch. I'll put your teeth down your throat, you son of a bitch.
You got to get the whole quote. He called Jean Charest a fat little, chubby little sucker.
Oh, man. I was there those days.
I actually do not worry that Singh is going to go too far on that. I think the problem's more the opposite.
Well, the person who was going to restrain him was Jay Hill, who stood up and Daryl, sit down. Anyway, it was pretty good. Priceless moment. Loved it.
Good stuff. My hey you, we talked about it already, but I just want to put a fine point on it. Is Pablo Rodriguez, and I what I know about Quebec politics would fit in a très petite thimble, but I look at the situation. I see a lot of flux and change on the provincial scene. Legault no longer seems invulnerable. The Péquistes, unfortunately, seem like they're resurgent. There's a lot of weird stuff happening on the conservative side of that spectrum. You got the overshadow of the federal brands. And I just think like saying, you know what, I'm going to go into service. Maybe we can breathe new life into the Quebec Liberal Party, rebrand it not just as a Federalist Party, but as an option for government in some way. I just think like that is yeoman's service, not just to the party, but to the country. And I wish him well. And I admire the fact that he's willing to do that because it looks like an uphill slog. So hats off to Pablo.
Here. I think it's...
Totally. I will just not waste anybody's time and echo that. This is no prize. This is something he's going to seek to do, and he's going to have to build it. And, it's for those of us who care about the country, it is important to have a clear Federalist voice in that provincial mix and a Federalist voice that can win and govern Quebec and have the confidence of Quebecers. I think Pablo's a guy that can do that. And, he's going to end up doing things we don't necessarily like. And he's going to have to do that, but he's going to be the best choice by far. So thanks for all your service to Canada, Pablo. It was a privilege to be a part of the beginning of it back in 2003, 2004, and very excited to watch this next stage. God bless you. Okay, I want to thank everybody who watched or listened to the show today. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsor, CN, Participaction, and the Canadian Bankers Association. The three of you for being here. Good laughs and... I would say good talk, but I think that's patented somewhere else. Anyway, we'll see you all next week with more of the Curse of Politics. Meantime, Scott, stay safe.
Stretch for strangers.